Up to our bar mitzvah boy over here. Anything, last night, if you weren't able to attend, Joe chanted flawlessly from the Torah, and as someone wrote me, he gave a mess, he proved that in 5 minutes, you can say more than some say in 50 minutes.
Thank you.
So. Siman Tavu, Mazel Tavu, Mazel Tav, Siman Tav, Siman Tavu, Mazel Tavu, Mazel Tav, Siman Tav, Siman Tavu, Mazel Tavu, Mazel Tav, Siman Tav, Yehelanu. Siman Tavu, Mazel Tavu, Mazel Tav, Siman Tav, Siman Tavu, Mazel Tav, Mazel Tav, Siman Tav, Siman Tavu, Mazel Tavu, Mazel Tav, Siman Tav, Yehelanu. We're not gonna lift them up in a chair, but there was an all-night party. Some of you may have missed. Ricky said in the kitchen. We should go out with Joe tonight and celebrate. But we do celebrate you. Mazel tov, Joe.
You're very kind. Thank you so much. I really appreciate what you do and who you are. Appreciate it.
We all appreciate you and who you are, and there will be no session tomorrow because of the King weekend, and apparently 3 to 5 inches of snow is coming our way. Yeah, Marion and others in New York, I don't think Memphis has anything on you with the weather approaching, but everybody, thank God we have Shabbat. It's a beautiful day.
Yeah.
Let's say the blessing, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. I'm trying to do the math. 1968 to now is 54 years ago, right? No, 56.
55 years ago.
Thank you. 55 and 2004, 56. So I mentioned at last night's service what a lot of people didn't know about Dr. King and the Jewish people. Every text has a context. A lot of people quote verses as though they happen in a vacuum. And I shared last night what he said 10 days before he died. He was headed to a Passover Seder, if you didn't know, in New York with his friend Abraham Joshua Heschel. He was assassinated on a Thursday, and Pesach, Passover, which is this week's Torah portion, began on a Sunday. And the only reason we have the holiday on Monday, the only one named for a minister. You know why we have this holiday?
It's his birthday.
Yeah, but why? Like, I'll give you a related question. Why was Hamilton on Broadway the hottest Broadway show, and why people started learning about Alexander Hamilton?
Was the first fellow African president on the dollar bill.
Yes, I'm being cryptic. Let me spoil it.
Because of the entrance.
Honestly, if you study the history, and history will show this, it's because of their spouses.
Their what?
Their spouses. The only reason Alexander Hamilton's name was resurrected was because of Eliza.
Yeah.
Who tells the story? History is written by those who tell the story. She raised the money for the Washington Monument. She resurrected his name. And Coretta is the reason there's a King Day. He was depressed at the end of his life, the last years of his life. King was disinvited from speaking at the NAACP. He was disinvited for his stance on the Vietnam War. He was too radical in opposing the Vietnam War. You know, he was obsessed with poverty. Everyone talks about race, but yes, but it was more than that. And so he identified with the Jewish people, so much so that he made this week's Torah portion and those surrounding it the whole motif of the civil rights movement. He had a PhD in Christian theology. Jesus would have been a much more logical fit. The suffering of the people, the blood on the cross. No, he chose the story of the Jewish people as the whole motif of going from slavery to freedom, from darkness to light, from despair to hope. And that's why, in a choreographed service like last night, if you want to finish in an hour and 15 minutes, I just gave a snippet of what he said, that the Jewish people never lived in bitterness. They chose blessing over bitterness. So there's a lot more than just, I have a dream speech, or Monday's a holiday. So I just wanted to note that, since this is the Shabbat of King weekend. And the verses that Joe chanted that open this week's Torah portion, Exodus 6, verse 2. Would somebody please read these? We do have slides for. So maybe somebody online to bring them in. Would somebody read, please?
God
Push
spoke
together.
to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name, the Lord. I
Wait, hold
also,
on. If you'll say, wait, Donald.
Yes.
If you'll say Adonai, whenever you get to Yud Hey Vav Hey, the Lord, I mean, we love 16th century English and the King James Version. It's not a Jewish Bible. So if you were start again, and when you get to the Yud Hey Vav Hey, say Adonai. Go ahead, please. You're reading beautifully. God spoke to Moses.
God spoke to Moses and said that I am Adonai. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by the name Adonai. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as sojourners. I have now
Okay,
heard.
let's stop. So we're gonna stop there. I'm sorry. We're gonna stop there, and we can remove the screen. And we're gonna come back. We're gonna come back. A teenager applied for a special summer program. And the application asks, name of mother. And the kid writes, Mom.
No.
It's a sweet and understandable error, but in fact, Mom is not your mother's name. Well, it is it is to you, right? Her real name is, let's say, Harriet Schwartz. That's her real name. You call her, you call your mother Mom. Her boss might call her Harriet. Your father might have called her Honey or Dear or other affectionate nicknames. Her siblings might refer to her by her childhood nickname, whatever Harriet's childhood nickname was. So the truth is, your mother has many names simultaneously, right? I mean, we all do, probably. Please.
Quickly, pre-Moses, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I don't recall in the Torah, God saying, my name is El Shaddai. Where is it?
So what Don just read in this Torah portion, God tells Moses that the patriarchs knew God as El Shaddai. And a midrash, to answer your question, says, God said to Moses, God said in the midrash, many times I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but they never asked my name.
Huh.
They never questioned my ways. Yet you, Moses, you're asking my name. So in fact, there are many different names for God. And you already know them. I didn't mean to interrupt. Actually, I did mean to interrupt Donald because let's go around the room. And what are the different names that you know for God in Judaism?
Adonai,
What? Okay, Adonai, go ahead. I know you know others.
El Shaddai.
Now, since this is an adult class and our first time not being on Facebook, the problem with Facebook is it's on forever and it's great because thousands of people watch it. I get notes from people this week from California and Connecticut, but you gotta be careful, right? What you say, because it's on there forever. So, do you know what Shaddai is? We say God, what?
That's what I was about to ask. What does Shaddai mean?
Shaddai means Almighty, so you hear
So
like
God Almighty.
God Almighty, but English doesn't really help. I'm not saying this to be salacious or racy, but Shaddai are breasts.
Okay.
Like Kroger right now, like they're all buying food off the shelves because, you know, Memphis freaks out when there's snow. And so tomorrow, like, you can't get a parking spot at Kroger at 7:30 this morning when I'm passing by, like, it's full. So if you want to get chicken breasts, you get Shaddai. Right. This isn't a sexual comment. This is a natural comment. When Abraham and the early patriarchs saw the wonder and beauty and grandeur and majesty of the world, the mountains, the topography, it could be, you know, it's the awesomeness. It's we don't have to get graphic with the image of the human body and the mountains, but it's kind of like when you go into a cathedral, and we have Jewish cathedrals like Temple on Fifth Avenue. There's a sense of transcendence. There's a sense of awesomeness. Even this sanctuary that was built in 76. You know why it was built the way it was in a semicircle? Of course, because the other half of the community, there's a midrash that prayer lead to action. That's why Temple Sanctuary was built in a semicircle. The other half is where your prayers are supposed to land to change the world. What good are your prayers if they stay inside a building? That's the genius behind the architecture. But the other genius behind the architecture sanctuary is the notion of El Shaddai in the balcony and immanence in the lower part of the sanctuary. What is the balcony intent? Oh my God, there are 1,500 seats. This is awesome. Like awe. You know what I mean? That's transcendent. Some people think of God in terms of the cosmos.
Right.
However, now is immanence. Want to be close to each other, you know, prayer circles. And the architect did an optical illusion, if you will, because we are in the front rows of the lower part of our sanctuary here at Temple Israel. You can't even see the 600 seats in the back. So I had a bat mitzvah girl who only had like 25 people coming to her bat mitzvah recently. And I said, let's do it in the Danziger Chapel. She said, I really love the sanctuary. She told her mom. So we did it in the front of the sanctuary, and you're really not that far from the bima. It didn't feel cavernous unless you're like in the back of the, like on Friday night, sometimes I try to move things into the chapel because on Friday nights when people spread out, there could be 300 people in there, 300 people, and it looks like it's, where is everybody? And they couldn't even fit in the chapel. So this issue of El Shaddai, it has to do with the early patriarchs and matriarchs. You imagine if you're like the first human, like, oh my God, look at the world. That's El Shaddai, God Almighty. but Moses is asking his name. So there are many different names for God. You said Elohim. There you go. On the high holidays, we sing Avinu Malkeinu. What does that mean? Our Father, our King. The phrase that Christians always say, "Our Father who art in heaven," comes from the Jewish, one of 70 names for God. We're not going to spend our hour reading all 70 names, but you know other names.
Adonai Tzvaot,
What?
Adonai Tzvaot.
Very good. The Lord of hosts.
El Elyon.
What?
El Elyon.
Very good. The higher God. God is also called Makor Ahava, the source of love. When people get married, God is called the source. What? Ribono Shel Olam. Very good. And that's master of the universe. Yeah, other names?
Hashem.
Yeah, well, so.
That, doesn't that
It's-
imply, though, a greater intimacy on the part of Moses? It's a very intimate thing to ask someone their name.
There you go. That's the point, exactly. That we're moving from the awesomeness and distant God, which is also, remember the old Union prayer book? I miss the language of the old Union prayer book.
No, I don't.
I mean, the fact that I remember it from my childhood, a vast universe. What mind can fathom it? We look out to the endless seas and ask, what are we? Like you're on a cruise and like you see the ocean and it's like, wow. And now, as Donald said, we move to Moses asking God, what's your name? Right? So it is an intimate question. And there are more intimate names for God. Friday night, because we have to choreograph an hour and 15-minute service, sometimes if we did more of the prayers and it was longer, we might sing Yedi Nefesh Avarchaman. What is that Friday night song? What does it mean? God is called a Yedid Nefesh. You know what that means? Soul friend. Talk about intimate. God is a soul friend. God is called, let's not leave the women out, because we always talk about Avinu Malkeinu. We've had 10 deaths in the past 3 weeks, I think. It's very interesting. I asked Canali, and a lot of people hold on to the end of the year. It's not an accident that last night's Kaddish list and a lot of the Kaddish lists in December, January are the longest of the year. And at the funeral I've been doing all these funerals, and Raymond Buring, who passed away, will be Tuesday. We will say the prayer for him, as we do for everyone when they leave this world. El Male Rachamim. Right? Which we always translate, I don't know, what is the English? El Male Rachamim. Compassionate God. It's the prayer for eternal life, right? That when we die, our bodies stop working, but our souls go wherever we go from here, back to the source, and enter the hearts of the people we love, which is why people cry when people die. You ever think about this? When somebody dies, they're fine, we're not, right? That's pretty much, that sums it up. So what's the point? What does El Male Rachamim mean? Rachamim, Rechem is the womb. The womb of the universe. You don't have to be a feminist. Like, that is literally what it means. So anyway, God's new name, Yud He Vav He. Now, for 2,000 years, Jews have pronounced it, as Don did, Adonai, or as he did before, my Lord. Though some people simply translate this, if you look at the new prayer books, as the eternal. But all those names for God are, honestly, just guesses. We don't know how to pronounce God's real name. Maybe we never knew it. Because the only time it was pronounced was once a year. What happened? On Yom Kippur, the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies in the ancient temple and say God's name. But somehow the vowels of God's name got lost, along with the real pronunciation of God's four-letter name. Will you put the slide back up, our friend Jay, of that first, what Don was reading?
My Christian friends say is Yahweh.
Yahweh. Is it pronounced Yahweh? Is it Jehovah?
I told him.
As in the Christian missionary group, Jehovah's Witness? Now, if you look at it, look at the text, look at verse 2, there's the Hebrew, and with the English. God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am, and then if you go from right to left, those four letters, Yud He Vav He. We not only don't know how to say it, it's considered bad form to even try. That's why some Jews simply refer to God as Hashem, the name. We don't know what the name. Now, we know that it can't be Jehovah. Why?
There's no
There's no
J.
J, there's no J in Hebrew.
No J in Hebrew. Yahweh, it can't be that. Why?
There's no vowel.
No, close. We're just talking 22 consonants. There's no W in Hebrew.
Yeah.
There's no W. I just want to show you before I forget, because I'm old now. Older. And the two of you will speak next. Look at that Hebrew again, with the English. I am Yud He Vav He. I had a brilliant professor of Semitic languages at the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, which unfortunately has been shuttered by the New York administration. But anyway, this amazing professor wrote a paper, a scholarly paper, arguing. Look up there, Yud He Vav He. You could put any vowels in it. We don't know. And for shock value, using scholarship, he argued there's a greater likelihood that Yud He Vav He was pronounced. They didn't have Yahoo back then. Yoo-hoo. He's like, where did this like Yahweh, Jehovah? We don't know. You had your hands up, please. Two of you. Carla first, then Russell.
I just had a crazy question.
Yep.
Because there's so many different names and maybe during different times and different groups of people. Is that like maybe somehow connection between those people or that time period with God? As in, I could be a mother, a sister, a friend, an aunt, or someone could be an uncle. You get the idea. It's a different relationship with a different person. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I do, and therefore, what are you asking?
I'm wondering if maybe that's why there's so many names.
Okay. Yud He Vav He. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt Russell. Russell.
I think the vowels from Jehovah came from the way they usually put vowels in modern Hebrew.
Correct.
However, it's my understanding that the rabbis, when they started putting those vowels in, purposely put vowels that they thought were not the name of God. So if someone accidentally pronounced it, they would not pronounce God's name.
Well said. What we do know, though, is before we try to guess what the vowels are, we do know that Yud He Vav He is related to the Hebrew verb root. Yeah, as I've taught you before, and I'm sure other rabbis have also taught this class, have shared with you, every word in the Bible, and the whole Hebrew Bible is called the Old Testament, was written in Hebrew, has a 2 or 3 letter root. So last night we chanted the Kiddush. Joe's family led us in the Kiddush, KDSH. We ended the service with the mourners Kaddish, Kadsh. I'm doing a wedding in a few days or a few weeks, and that will be called Kiddushin. That's what marriage is, Kdsh. We know that Yud Hey Vav Hey is related to the Hebrew root Hey Vav Hey, which means to be. So Yud Hey Vav Hey could mean that which causes to be, which would be a pretty good way to describe God. I want to quote to you the Arthur Green, the contemporary theologian. He believes that Yud Hey Vav Hey is a simultaneous rendition of the Hebrew root to be in its past, present, and future tenses, as though it really was, is, was, will be. In other words, it's a verb caught in motion. So God's name is something like is, was, will be. It's impossible for us to say God's real name, as it's impossible to really know God's nature, although we strive to imitate God's ways. That's the problem and the challenge. You know what I mean? So, yeah, please speak up.
Possibility that it could be related to the word for love. I hope it.
Well, no, there's no bet in it, like Yahab, like to get love, but God, one of the names of God is Makor Ahava, source of love, but with the Yud Hey, it's the Vav, not the Vet.
Okay.
But we shouldn't, this is the problem, I mean, this is what's hard about teaching God to children. The Jewish idea of God, that God incarnates himself or herself in everyone and changes the world.
It's beingness.
It's beingness. Like, how do you tell a little kid that? They want to see
That's what
something
it is.
physical. That's why, like,
Beingness.
our dear Christian friends, when you say, oh, God incarnated himself in one man, and his name is Jesus, right?
Alright.
And then you try to teach that God incarnates himself in every woman, man, and child. And is being, it's not physical, but is being. So this Yud Hey Vav Hey, David Ellenson of blessed memory, the former president of the Hebrew Union College, who died suddenly of a heart attack, was my professor, was the president of the Hebrew Union College, my neighbor. When I was under his wings in LA, and he was teaching at UCLA as well, he taught Jewish studies there. I'm now gonna write Exodus 6:2 on the board. An Orthodox girl in the class screamed and ran out. Why? She thought that he was gonna write out Yud Hey Vav Hey, and she was taught that if you do, God will come down and strike Dr. Ellenson. Like, you don't do that. You can't do that. Now, of course, he was never gonna write out Yud Hey Vav Hey in the presence of like a class of Jews from the greater LA area. He was just gonna write out YHVH. So this, it's called the Tetragrammaton. That's a big word, the 4-letter name of God. But in Judaism, it's not meant to constrain the names of God. It's meant to expand them, as Wendy said, in beingness. And how do we experience beingness? With a friend, with love, with a parent. And by the way, before I forget, one of the things that bothers me, I don't watch Sunday morning mega church pastors anymore, even if they're local. One of them I'm friends with, and we had lunch and he understood. Sometimes you only know what you're taught. And the fact that Henry's here is such a blessing, the fact that I just met with my imam friends with the Gaza war, it's just awful, you can imagine, but we're living in the best time when it comes to interfaith relations, because it's no longer, I have to put you down to lift me up. There can be different branches or different paths to the same God. But there are some in the particularly Protestant far-right evangelical community who've been mistaught. It's not their fault. I mean, they were taught in seminary, for instance, that the God of the Old Testament, the God of law, the God of the New Testament is a God of love. God in the Old Testament was so distant, you couldn't have a relationship with him until Jesus came and became this intimate connector. Well, that's disingenuous because you have 70 different names of God. How much more intimate can you be than a lover or a parent, a mommy or a daddy? So there is lots of in the Old Testament, and there's also, don't short shrift the New Testament for guidelines for living. There's also law. So this is an important opening. It's also the basis for Passover. We're going to move on to the next verses, but not before you talk. Who had their hand up? Go.
Doesn't God say somewhere else, I am who I am?
There you go. Well, that's what, this is how some people
I am that I
Eheyeh,
am.
Asher, Eheyeh. Very good. I am what I will be. It's the same is, was, will be. Is,
It's all
was,
of the
will.
conjugations of the verb to be.
There you go. That sums it up.
What you said about parent and family. Hosea, the marriage ceremony, he said, don't call me master anymore, call me your husband. It's how much more love can you get?
Well, Hosea is the love prophet. When people have to fill in, they say, you are betrothed to me. You know, the circling of bride and groom at weddings, it comes from Hosea, imitating God's love. Yes. Okay, let's go on. Next verses.
But
I
We-
heard, no, go back. We didn't read the bottom of that page. Somebody else online who's not the Donald. Sorry, Donald.
okay, I'll read.
From verse 5.
Oh,
Now heard.
hold on. I've now heard the moaning of the Israelites because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. That's all it
Keep
goes
going.
to the screen. I can't.
I'm sorry.
Oh, there we go. Say therefore to the Israelite people, I am Adonai. I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians and deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and through extraordinary chastisements. And I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I, Adonai, am your God who freed you from the labors of the Egyptians. And I will
One more verse.
Okay. And I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession. I, Adonai.
What was just read, thank you so much for reading it, is the single paradigmatic, the paradigm, if you will, of Jewish redemption in 4 verses of liberation. It gives me chills when we remember a king's cry for freedom for all. What are the 4 verses that she just read? I will free you, Vehotseti. I will deliver you, Vehitsalti. I will redeem you, Vigaalti. And I will take you from your bondage into Vilakakti.
Isn't that the 4 cups of wine?
You are such a smart rabbi. Where does that come from? In the Midrash Shemot Rabbah, the sages ordained 4 cups to be drunk on the eve of Passover to correspond with these 4 expressions. In order to fulfill the verse, if you want to check me, it's Psalm 116, where it says, I raised the cup of deliverance and invoke the name of Adonai. What does it mean to raise it? And by the way, again, we're talking interfaith relations because we're approaching Lent and Passover and Easter. The Last Supper could not have been a Passover Seder. Why? The Passover Seder wasn't invented
Didn't come then.
until after the book of John in 110, 120. As a retort to the early Christians. You feel for the early Christians because Judaism is a dominant religion. They're trying to start this religion about the blood savior, and Judaism was the dominant religion. So the rabbis created the Seder to say, if you want to believe that, that's fine. Judaism is about freedom from slavery. So they had to come up with like, how do you create a script for it? They created the Passover Seder. The Bible doesn't say, how do you do it? So the early rabbis, up to about, the Seder was probably invented in the mid-2nd century. And that's when our Rabbi Wendy just quoted what we all know. It's these verses that account, but if you look closely, our friend just read a 5th. Veheveti, I'm not only gonna redeem you from slavery, I will bring you into the land. What's the 5th cup? I thought there were only 4 cups. Oh, you're so smart. Exactly. That's the basis for Elijah's cup.
Isn't there an emphasis to this that God is always outside of us? And where is the room in here for the God that dwells within us?
So,
That's the
well, I don't wanna
one.
go back to the first slide, but it said, God says, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites. Now, I just did a temple, we do a monthly show called The Mystic at Crosstown. It's interfaith with Scott Morris, myself, Lillian Lammers, and musicians. And we were talking about grace, which is an interesting word. It means something different in Judaism than it does in Christianity. Judaism definitely believes God's favor, an act of grace. You know, we'll talk about that. But grace in Hebrew, back to the Hebrew root chen, also means like protection. Camp, the word machaneh. It's not just favor, but my point is back to your question, Donald. What happens on Yom Kippur? How do you get repentance? What do you have to do?
You
You have to what?
fast.
Yeah, but what do you do if I wronged you, Ricky, in the
Oh,
kitchen?
you have to make amends.
What is teshuva?
Yes.
Yeah, make
Amends.
amends, meaning what? How do you make amends?
You have to go to the person.
There you go. You have to go to the person, right? It takes an act of going to the person.
Right.
To Donald's question, in this week's Torah portion, why does God redeem slaves? What do they have to do? The answer, let's not waste our time, it's already 10:30, is nothing. People are hurting. God hears their cries. Now, Moses and Aaron have to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. But the point is, God says to Moses, talk about intimacy, I hear you. I will redeem you, take you, save you, bring you, right? Now, let's go to chapter, it's not on the slides because I want to read chapter 7. Everybody flip to chapter 7, go. Yeah, and Joe.
I think that, I don't think we should just pass.
Speak up, please, so everybody can hear you.
That's 400 years, if we had done something to deserve this, it wouldn't have taken 400 years. I think what it takes is the sermon that Rabbi Greenstein gave on Yom Kippur several years ago.
I forget what I did.
One of my favorite is, you can't buy this. You can't, this is God's love. That is, I think that is the only explanation for all these verses. There's no other reason for any of these, except if you love someone that intensely.
Well, now you're quoting Hosea again, though the mountains may move, my love for you will never change.
That's the radical amazement.
Absolutely. I'm sorry I didn't make a slide for this, but if you look at your Bibles, chapter 7 in Exodus, where it says, would somebody here read, please? Somebody read chapter 7, go, verse 1. The Lord replied to Moses. Anybody, any Bible, any Jewish
Replied
Bible.
to Moses.
Yeah.
Oh,
See, place you in the role of God to Pharaoh with your brother Aaron as your prophet. You shall repeat all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall speak to Pharaoh to let the Israelites depart from his land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that I may multiply my signs and marvels in the land of Egypt. When Pharaoh does not heed you, I will lay my hand upon Egypt and deliver my ranks, my people, the Israelites, from the land of Egypt, with extraordinary chastisements. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I stretch out my hand over Egypt and bring out the Israelites from their midst.
And pay attention, this is one of the only times where the Torah mentions people's ages. Go ahead.
This Moses and Aaron did, as the Lord commanded them, so they did. Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 when they made their demand on Pharaoh.
That righteous age of 83, King David's lifetime plus 13. I mean, you know, you think, let my people go. You think they were like young 20-something activists. 80 and 83.
They were old.
They were young enough in spirit to know, let my people go, which reminds me of the women's rally, like, women were fighting for equal rights and reproductive freedom 50 years ago. And I'll never forget, I saw down in the National Civil Rights Museum, a woman in her 80s holding a sign that said, I can't believe we're still fighting for this SH.
Oh.
Right. So you're not old. It's just, we're still fighting for the same freedoms.
You know,
Right?
you're here.
Yes, let's go on. Yeah, please.
What's a little disturbing about this passage is what God is telling Moses is, I'm gonna harden Pharaoh's heart, so I have an excuse to show him how powerful I am.
Right.
Okay.
What
Right.
can't he just
Okay.
is without hardening, I mean.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. I want to address that quickly, but I want to get to frogs before 11 o'clock. I spent a lot of time this week studying more on frogs. But let me answer Joel's question. Here's what people don't understand if they just quote the Bible. Yes, God promises here, and he read that I will harden Pharaoh's heart. But we don't have time today, but text describing the first, it tells a different story. Because first 5 plagues, we read that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. During the last 5 plagues, the text does read, God hardened the heart of Pharaoh. I'll give you an example because there's a physician in this room, maybe even one online. I have a friend who had a father who sadly died, even though the kids recruited the family to make warning signs around the house while this father was at work. Most of the signs feature and crossbones with messages, smoking, you're eating your heart out. You're too young to die. One sign was more sympathetic. We love you, Dad. We need you. When Dad came home that night and saw what the family had done, he was furious and he tore the signs down. So that's a way that the heart can be hardened. We can all become so stubborn that we refuse to listen, and then it becomes our own decision.
Right.
So that is a way to describe it. When I was younger, I used to think like, what's God doing here? What kind of game is this? But it's life. It's not God. It's all harden our own hearts. Someone else want to comment, please?
I asked this question, Rabbi, last week. Everyone's heard it. Remember the last few paragraphs we read? God remembered his covenant. I thought God was all knowing. Did he can't multitask? I mean, he need faculty for the university. Oh, that- He doesn't have to remember after several hundred years. Just, didn't he know when we first were enslaved?
So
Makes sense.
it's a very deep existential theological. Of course, God knows everything, but we're also granted free will.
Right. Very complicated.
But we were slaves. How could we be granted free will? I'm just trying to.
Well, if you look, we were supposed to be for 400 years, but it was only after 210 years that Moses and Aaron went to, I didn't take, because things got so bad, took courage to stand up and to say enough. So, look, life can only be lived forward, right? I mean, we're asking, why did it happen that way? We weren't there. It's but here's what I know. Yesterday morning, a member of our congregation had to go to work because people can't just take off even if it's raining and the wind and the traffic lights went out. Call, at 7:30 in the morning, as often happens, and a light was out towards downtown, and a truck came and hit this car.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, it hit the back of the car and not the front of the car. So the member wasn't injured severely, but did God know that was going to happen? I mean, so you can, well, I don't want to use bad words, but we can all sit here and cogitate, but all I know is that the world was created with warning signs. Maybe we're causing atmospheric conditions through the way we're destroying the planet, but to believe that God would person and save them in the accident, but kill the other person who got killed in the accident is a mockery of a Jewish idea of God. So we're not God. We can't play that, but we do know we do have free will. And I want to get to frogs. Chapter 8, we do have the slides for it.
Rabbi, can I just respond?
Of course you can respond, give a better
One
answer.
quick thing, because he was talking about free will. And I just want to say, yeah, God gave you free will, right? But if you have a taskmaster that if you use your free will to step out, he's gonna kill you. You know what I mean? You still have free will, but can you use it? That's all I'm saying.
Wait, that's very important. That's not a throwaway line. That's not a throwaway line. Look, how did we go forward from Egypt? It took, yes, God heard our cries, but it took Nachshon, the story of the Midrash.
Right,
Like they got to the edge of the sea,
right,
it didn't split.
right.
You gotta step in the water. You gotta take a step. You can't just say, oh, we believe in freedom.
Right.
You gotta do something about it, right? So what Rabbi Wax did.
Oh, yeah.
Let's go on to chapter 8, verse 1. Somebody read, and Adonai said to Moses, can be another person online. Go ahead.
Say to
And
Aaron,
Adonai, go ahead.
sorry. And Adonai said to Moses, say to Aaron, hold out your arm with the rod over the rivers, the canals, the ponds, and bring up the frogs on the land of Egypt. Aaron held out his arm over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magician priests did the same with their spells and brought frogs upon the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, plead with Adonai to remove the frogs from me and my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to Adonai.
Keep going. I'm sorry. I think I have more slides. Good. Go.
And Moses said to Pharaoh, you may have this triumph over me, for what time I shall plead in behalf of you and your courtiers and your people, that the frogs be cut off from you and your houses to remain only in the Nile. For tomorrow, he replied, and Moses said, as you say, that you may know that there is none like our God, Adonai. The frogs shall retreat from you and your courtiers and your people. They shall remain only in the Nile. Then Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh's presence, and Moses cried out to Adonai in the manner of the frogs, which had been afflicted upon Pharaoh.
Marion, you just read something very important. I want you to continue. Then Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh's presence, and Moses cried out to Adonai. Keep going.
in the manner of the frogs which had been inflicted upon Pharaoh.
We have more.
Okay.
Good.
And Adonai did as Moses asked. The frogs died out in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields, and they piled them up in heaps till the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he became stubborn and would not. Adonai had spoken. Then Adonai said to say to Aaron, hold out your rod and strike the dust of the earth, and it shall turn to lice throughout the land of Egypt.
Okay, we're gonna stop there. We don't have time. Unfortunately, it's only 10 till. We'll go a little over, but I don't know how they do it in New York, Marion, but like in my seders, we put the pinky in.
Yep.
If you do it with a spoon or a pinky, we go dam, blood,
Yeah.
Tzfardea, frogs, lies, right? Okay,
This is always a very confusing part to me, though. I never can tell whether the purpose of this is to prove how powerful God was or to free the children of Israel, because
Yes.
God, all the time he's doing this, God
Oh.
is hardening the heart of Pharaoh, and he's coming back in. But
well, remember the first 5, like, it was like the cardiac patient who was eating poorly. This is not just God hardening Pharaoh's heart, Pharaoh hardened his own heart. But let's answer your question. What was the purpose of the plagues? Or why did God send 10 plagues instead of 1, right? Just send 1.
He could have cut to the chase.
Could have cut to the chase. So,
Wow.
one answer, let me just give you an answer the rabbis give. These plagues caused the Egyptians to experience the exact kind of pain they had inflicted upon the Israelites. 3 plagues, blood, beasts, and hail turned the Egyptians into strangers in their own land. Nature did not run its normal course. Frogs, cattle disease, and locusts, the rabbis say, subjected the Egyptians to a state of slavery because these caused terrible damage to property and wealth. So, in other words, the plagues caused the Egyptians to experience the exact kind of pain they inflicted upon the Israelites. I've gotten through 6 of them. Well, actually, 7 of them. And so there are 3 plagues left. No, I said 6. There are 4 plagues less. Lice, boils, and darkness cause pain and suffering to the body.
The human being.
And
To the body.
humiliation.
So we got absolutely humiliation, but we have causing damage to property, making you feel like you're a stranger in your own land, and causing pain. And the slaying of the firstborn stands alone in the deep pain that it caused and corresponds to all the Israelite lives that were lost. So that's an answer to the question, Don, of why there were 10 plagues instead of 1. And there's a phrase in next week's Torah portion. If you want to understand, I was in Israel. If you want to understand one verse about what it's like in Israel right now, it's after the slaying of the firstborn. Do you know what it says in the Torah? It says, Ki ein bait asher ein sham met, which means there was no house where someone had not died. And the rabbis asked, wait a minute, slaying of the firstborn, not everybody has kids. So like, how could it possibly be that every house in Egypt felt this plague? And the answer the rabbis give is, it's possible for disaster that you bring upon yourself to be so awful, or to experience disaster from someone else, that it feels as though every house, there's death in every house. That's what it feels like in Israel right now. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Ki ein bayit asher ein shamen. Without minimizing the misery of the Palestinians and the suffering and how this war needs to end. So that's an answer to your question, Don. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in what the rabbis say. Yeah, let's go.
Some of these plagues, the frogs, the locusts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bother me. I know there are at least two plagues that it says that the children of Israel were exempt from. For instance, it says that during the plague of darkness, there was light in their houses. And of course, the plague of the death of the firstborn, they did what was necessary. But the frogs were all over.
The what?
The frogs were all over the place. They must have gotten some damage from this as well.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, like, you're not the first Jews to wonder, like, how do we categorize these plagues? What do they represent? So, you'll, if you've studied this with other texts, they may even be in your commentaries. They're usually divided into three groups. The first division, blood, frogs, lice, consists of an attack on human beings from below, the land and the sea turning against them. The second group, beasts, livestock disease, boils. It's an attack on human beings from their own level. And the third group, hail, locust, darkness, is an attack on human beings from the heavens above. So it's fascinating, like, how do you categorize these? What do they mean? But it is a progression of what happens to a society when it doesn't let people be free, or when it inflicts pain and death. Yeah.
Yeah, this is what.
Speak up, Joe. We love your Torah.
Is the heart of the matter. How do you get people to feel? Maxine Smith, who was the civil rights leader in Memphis, was asked once, why don't these young people feel what you feel? He said, because they never had to sit at the back of the bus. The Youth Civil Rights Museum, Holocaust Museum, wonderful. How do you do? The rabbi and us. How do you actually get them to, the people say, I know how you feel. No, you don't. It's very great job. I looked this up. There was a god who had a woman's body and a frog's head. Her name was Hecate, whom they worshipped. It's God saying, you want frogs? I'll give you frogs.
That's very important. The Egyptians worship, right? A lot of these plagues were, expand on that. A commentary on the other gods.
Yeah, that's the key.
Go on.
The other gods, relation to people. Your creator creates a relation. You have that. Your creator cares about you. These gods don't care about you. They got their own business. There's no relation between the gods of the Egyptians and anybody.
But what you said before about relations, and like we talk about, you mentioned Maxine Smith and why don't the young people care?
Right.
In the Jewish community, there's a lot of consternation about why the 30 and 40 something don't care as much about Israel, other anti-Semitism.
Or Judaism.
And I am more empathic on this. I don't believe, what's wrong with those younger, I think it relates to what you just said. My childhood, my own childhood, I knew Holocaust survivors.
Right.
I have relatives who went to Israel instead of America.
Right.
People sat around this table like Dave Weiner of blessed memory, who left Tulane Medical School to be a medic in the Pacific and taught me privately why soldiers wore dog tags, not just around their necks, but around their ankles. He was in the third wave with the medics. First wave, all got killed. Second wave, many died. He was the doctor who would go in as a young medical student, but like my 30-year-old son, he doesn't know any of that. He just hears me talk about that.
Right.
So if you never experience the history, how do you relate to it? And that's the challenge for kids in South Memphis and for Jews in America. No one has solved this. You know, you have all these great social studies curricula like Facing History and Ourselves and all this, but like we have to be honest, like we haven't found a way.
That's Judaism has no past. It's all one day.
Right. I know it's almost 11. We're gonna say Kaddish, but Joel, I want you to have the last word.
Yeah, I was thinking of this whole thing as a kind of a push-pull thing. Moses wants to out of Egypt,
Yeah,
but then not everybody's gonna follow,
okay.
all right? So by God inflicting the Egyptians with 10 plagues, you're gonna get the push. You gotta go and take that God with you, because we can't put up with any more of this. I mean, it was gonna give a little more incentive to go. With some more people would leave.
This is no small, point, because we now know from archaeology and history that he needed a push. Everybody left Egypt.
Right.
We all think like all 600, if 600,000 Jews left Egypt, you would have record of everyone, you know, and there were no record, there's very little record of the Exodus, you know, and there's a big scholarly debate, you know, did it happen or did it not? The answer is your answer. That with a little uts, many left, but not all.
Not all.
Not all. And in fact, when you hear later in the Torah, the ones who left said, maybe we should go back to Egypt, it's better than the wilderness, because a lot of families stayed. Yeah,
I asked Vivian Arundel, who teaches Judaica studies, why are there no records? And she said, the Egyptians didn't write anything that made them look bad. Not just to this, she says there's other historical things that are not in the written records that made them look bad.
that's one view. If you want to Google a great article that sums it up by my friend David Wolpe, he's a fabulous rabbi, just retired in LA. New York Times, David Wolpe, The Exodus, where he summarizes the scholarly debate on this. And instead of just saying, oh, the Egyptians didn't want to make them look bad, the answer is more that what Joel was saying, some left, but not all, and not because of the Egyptians only. It's because it's hard to get, like if we said, hey, look at Germany, oh my God, like, get out of Germany.
Right.
Get out of Germany. And some Jews didn't, because they couldn't imagine it. You know, it's bad, but it's not gonna get that bad. Right. Yeah,
I wanted to put a footnote on what Joe just said in response to Ricky, also on time. I recently discovered on the internet a brief article by Neil deGrasse Tyson on time.
wow.
And he presents the astrophysicist point of view as why it is all right now. Past, present, and future, all now in one day. And he presents the scientific view of why that is true.
Now we're back to where we started, is, was, will be. No, we're back to Adonai. Past, present, future, all in one moment. Let's say Kaddish. We are remembering Sandy Goldstein, Terry Tannenbaum, Harold Blumberg, who all died since last Torah study. And in the last 30 alone here at Temple, John Dreyfus and Kaplan Lasnik, Richard Felsen, Barbara Fellerman Shanefield, Marcia E. Hayden, Geraldine F. Jerry Aspel. We knew a lot of these people, those of us who've been here. Harriet Penny Bloomfield, David Charles Bowman, Katie Bowman's father.
Yeah. Great guy.
Matthew Matt Copeland,
My cousin.
and your cousin, and the face of Temple Israel, Fox,
Yes.
her mother Rosanna
Yeah.
Fox,
Yeah.
who was the voice of Temple Israel. And I'm telling Barbara in the kitchen with Rebecca that if you want to understand the face and the voice of Temple, you just put Rebecca and Rosanna together. And then there are others around the table we want to remember. By the way, we also lost Raymond Buring and Anthony Siegel just before Shabbat. They'll be buried after Shabbat. Yeah,
And my uncle Bernard.
Uncle Bernard Lansky.
Mentioned it last time.
Please mention him again.
Yeah. Grandfather Hyman Ottberg.
Daisy O'Mill and Dora Peltz.
Thank you for saying.
Gersten Strauss, our uncle, great uncle.
Sandra Lazar.
Thank you, Maren. Yes, Russell?
And I think Don was saying it where we didn't catch his name. It was Gaston Strauss. His name is spelled Gerson, but he called himself Gaston.
How's he related to you all?
Yeah, great uncle.
Great uncle. So we rise in body or spirit. If it's hard to rise in body, I know we all rise in spirit as we say Yit Gadal, we Yit Gadal. Adi Rav,
Shalom, Shalom, Aleinu, Israel, Baruch, Amen.
Shalom,
Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Yahwehnu, Eloto Israel, Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Aleinu, Eloto Israel, Amen.
This is a Reformed synagogue, but it kind of sounds like an Orthodox shul with all the voices. I think what the Zoom has done is it sounds like a yeshiva, so to all of you voices we've been hearing online, and to everybody here at Temple, there's more food if anyone would like to enjoy. A good Shabbos to you all, Shabbat Shalom. Mazel Tov again, Joe.
And Mazel Tov on your birthday, Rabbi.
Thank you so much. I look forward to my second bar mitzvah in 22 years.
Mazel tov on Joe's bar mitzvah and on his birthday as well. What a great service last night.
I thought so too.
Yeah.
No, they didn't miss me. No,
I
they didn't
happened
miss
upon
me.
it by chance. I was so happy. It was beautiful.
Wasn't that gorgeous? That was wonderful.